And we're going to turn back now to our discussion of the impact of the Sterling controversy in terms of race relations in America. Joining us now, NPR's Michele Norris, Ta-Nehisi Coates, who writes about race and culture for The Atlantic, and we welcome him to the broadcast. We're also joined by Georgetown University's Eric Dyson, and Ruth Marcus, columnist for the Washington Post, and Bill Rhoden, who is the sports columnist of the New York Times. And Bill, let me just start with you, because I think as we were hearing from the mayor this morning, it looks like Sterling may try to just stick this thing out. His wife says that she's willing to go along with the NBA. Is your sense he's going to fight this thing?
Oh, I knew that from day one. I mean, there's going to be a lot of blood on the street. If you don't think, I mean, this guy didn't get to be a billionaire and owner by being a pushover. This is going to be a bloody fight, a bloody fight. If you think that he's going to give his franchise easily, and particularly right now, the worst thing in the world for him, the Clippers now have become an item. You know, they may well go to the NBA Finals. That will kill him more than any punishment that could be. So just lay back. And I think that a lot of the owners, if you notice, a lot of the other owners, after saying hip hip hooray on Tuesday, have started to rethink this. So, wait a minute, what implications does this have for me? So I think that we're going to have a long fight, which I think is good.
Why do you think that's good?
Well, I think it's good because we're having this conversation. You know, my fear is that as soon as the players are over, a lot of people want it to be over. As soon as the minute the Clippers are eliminated, this conversation is going to be over. And it's so funny that a sports team, once again, because remember a few months ago we were talking about incognito and bullying. So here we are right back because of some sports issue in a very interesting dynamic where you've got a whole lot of young African-American men controlled or paid by a lot of white, rich billionaires, which really hits a button in this country. So I wish they could play until next September.
Why do you, I'd be interested, why do you all think it took so long? Apparently this guy's got quite a record. I mean,
Right. Well, I think, look, it's difficult to prove implicit racism or comments made in private that don't necessarily bleed to the public, although we know that he settled a pretty large lawsuit. But to really move the needle on race in that regard by holding somebody accountable means it usually has to flare up in the situation that has occurred now. Because people say, well, race is a card. You know, people play the race card. It's not a card, it's a condition. More likely, it's a continuum. And I see a relationship between what Paul Ryan says when he talks about inner city people who are urban with all the code words being articulated and the kind of Cliven Bundy expression to the kind of Donald Sterling. Only when there's a kind of conflagration and there's a flashpoint do we then galvanize our energies, either pro or con, and we begin to talk about what's happening here. So I think Donald Sterling has never been held accountable in quite this public
You know,
fashion.
Michele, what struck me about all this is that this is on the 50th anniversary of the signing of the 1964 Civil Rights Bill. I don't think there's any question whatsoever that we've come a long way since that day. But is this some aberration, or is this a symptom of something that runs deep in American society?
Oh, it's a symptom. And it's the anniversary of the Brown v. Board decision. We're coming up on a lot of big anniversaries. I'm not surprised that it happened in the arena of sports, because in many ways sports often pushes this conversation because of the sort of ideas of fairness attached to sports, that you're supposed to win clean and play fair. And so I do think this is symptomatic, and it's interesting because Mr. Silver took us to an interesting place. He did not punish Donald Silver for what he did or for what he said in public. He basically punished him for what he believes. And then that makes us all think about things, because I actually collect race cards from people. I collect 6-word thoughts on race, and I travel across the country. And in private spaces, if someone says, don't bring that person back home, okay, that's a little bit different than what Donald Sterling said, but they're talking about their private beliefs and their private spaces. You know, you please keep with your own kind. You know, those kinds of things. You people, if you're really honest, those are the kinds of things that often, sometimes, we know it happens to some degree, that people sometimes say in their private spaces about people who don't look like them, people who don't share their religion, people who don't share their zip code.
Ta-Nehisi, what's your thought on that?
Well, I think Michele is exactly right. It has to be a symptom. I don't know how it can't be a symptom. We had 250 years of slavery in this country. After that, we had 100 years of terrorism, Jim Crow, denial of people the right to vote, the thieving of property, and all, other sorts of evils. And then over the past 50 or so years, we've made some halting progress, real progress, but halting progress along the way. The expectation that all of that goes away is something I've never understood about the conversation we have. I don't know why anybody is necessarily surprised that an 80-year-old man thinks that it's shameful to have his girlfriend appear around black men. There's a long history of blackness as being a mark of shame, among a group of people. The idea that that will immediately go away because we passed some very significant laws 50 years ago and have been, fighting this ever since, I think is a little naive.
Ruth Marcus, it's not just his feeling toward minorities, but kind of his treatment of women. I mean, this whole idea of this woman, V, or whatever her name is. V. Stiviano.
This race is the main event here, but there is the most fascinating and kind of repelling sexual gender subplot going on. And this videotape is just evidence. That piece of the story, as with the other, just gets creepier and creepier. She's his silly rabbit. Come on.
What is a silly rabbit?
They have this weird symbiotic relationship that somehow has managed to outlast the incredible, nobody deserves it more than Donald Sterling, but what a betrayal to take these private audio tapes and somehow they get out into public. She says she wasn't the agent of it, but she did do the tape.
Well, what's interesting is that psychosexual jealousy is there, I think has been alluded to. But I don't want, it's just like with rappers who are mad at the video vixen girls who are in there, look at, nobody made you do it. Well, when we look at her, these are the cards handed to her. So, having been a pastor, sometimes people exercise power strategically, institutionally, sometimes they do it through rumor. So powerless people use what's at stake, and what she has are words, collected items of thought, belief, sentiment, and passion that may have consequence in public, because it's not simply his personal belief, it's the fact that his personal belief led him to deny Latino and African American people housing. That's an empirical proof of a privately held existential belief.
Am I to understand there are lots and lots and lots of these tapes?
She says there's 100 or so arrows because there is at some point, and we're all reduced to relying on TMZ as our source here, but that she was his archivist. And that she suggests at one point was
he wants
beginning
all
to
this
beginning to forget
Richard
things.
Nixon meets
so it was
Derrida.
her job to tape him,
which is important because that implies consent.
Right. How convenient is that? Can I be the glass half full white girl at the table? And so that may put me in an odd position. What I was struck by in his conversation about race in the tapes, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is even Donald Sterling is embarrassed about being a racist. He sounds actually sincerely injured at various points on the tape when he says to her, "But you think I'm a racist?" And she says, "Of course not, honey. Of course not, honey. Would you like some more juice?"
Therefore more destructive because white innocence needs to protect itself against the acknowledgement that what it's doing is wrong. So now we coddle the racists as opposed to confront the racism.
I'm not arguing that he shouldn't be confronted. I thought it was striking in 2014. Everyone is embarrassed at the notion of being a racist.
The idea that he was
except for
struggling with
Bundy.
it, though, is interesting because one of the long-term effects of this is that it may make people afraid to talk about race, because if you're shown to be biased or bigoted in some way, I don't want to. I'm going to walk through eggshells or walk through a minefield. I don't want to talk about it. But he clearly was struggling with this as he was talking.
Well, really, the guy gets caught in the closet by somebody's husband. And they open the door. He's going to say, "Oh well, I was in here just doing an audit, of the closet here." Everybody's going to say something when they get caught doing something like this.
Point about this shame.
Yeah.
I'm going through Taylor Branch's third volume in his book. Richard Nixon is talking about Strom Thurmond in '68, and he says Strom is not a racist. Living at the edge of what is shameful is nothing particularly new when it comes to being white in this country. Immediately after the Civil War, Jefferson Davis says, no, it wasn't about slavery. Despite everything before that, it being about slavery. The thing is, racism is shameful right now. So wherever shame is, that's where folks want to be on the other side of. But that has nothing to do with whether they're actually practicing it, whether they're actually doing it. People don't want to be shamed.
Here's the thing. I mean, I've spent the last 30-something, I've been at the New York Times for like 32 years. And I've spent most of my time in press boxes and all that. And I'm stunned. I mean, see, people say the same thing that Sterling said by action. So I go to a lot of press boxes in 2014, where I'm the only black guy in the press box. Right. I walk through newsrooms, sports departments, where there are no black people at all. And I was telling a lot of these guys, the Clippers, NBA, NFL guys, take a stroll through your front office one day. Go up to the accounting, go up to the executive director's office, you are going to be stunned by the lack of a black presence. So a lot of people are saying the same things about you through actions, which is the definition of racism, right. Where Sterling was just apologetic. There are a lot of guys, owners, who are not saying anything, but they're doing it. They're right. Doing it through the absence and cultivating that absence. So
and sometimes they do say it, but it doesn't hit our ear the same way. Right. So when someone says he's just not the right fit,
right?
It doesn't. Yeah. We don't. We're not. It's language that carries the same weight behind it. In fact, even more in some cases, because it blocks people out.
Right. So the guy called me the other from the NBA, kind of wrote a column, and I was quoting a former GM lamenting the decline of black general managers in the NBA. Like now there's 6, and he said, well, we've just appointed a deputy black commissioner. I said, listen, man, the NBA has been integrated and predominantly black since 1988. You could argue that there should be probably like 20 black general managers. There should probably be about 20 black coaches. So there's something going, there's the active glass ceiling going on that keeps these numbers ridiculously low.
Let me just take a break here. We got a lot more to talk about, but we got to make a little money here. So. Well, we're back with our panel, and I don't even have to ask questions. Michael Eric Dyson.
You know what was interesting in all of this? I was so proud of the players because they were willing to stand up, because players are fined for speaking inappropriately and so on. So there's the kind of implicit suppression of their free speech, but I was glad they were able to galvanize their resources to be able to protest and boycott. But I want to issue a challenge to the players as well. Not only Donald Sterling, not only the NBA, how do you, when you choose who you bring into your circle, who are your agents? Who are your financial representatives? If you're collecting around you a group of well-qualified white people, no disrespect to well-qualified white people, but why don't you diversify your own circle? And why don't you not believe the myth that you got to get a white boy in order to get ahead in here? Why don't you do what LeBron James did? He allowed his young man to be trained by the dominant society's system. He allowed his young person to go to a major representative, and then he hired that person 2 years later after he had been trained. That's the kind of record of let me diversify in my own practice before I also talk about the necessity for the larger NBA.
Ta-Nehisi, where do you hope this goes?
Yes,
I hope that we don't go from fire to fire to fire to fire again. I think Bill made the great point that just a few months ago we were talking about incognito. Me and Bill were talking before we came out here, and just before that it was Riley Cooper. Using the N-word, right? Caught on tape, much like Donald Sterling. And I think we go from fire, oh that's horrible, and you get this kind of apology tour, and then you get another incident, and then we have conversations, and then at some point, we have to do something deeper, where we, stop thinking about this in terms of an emergency, and realize that we're dealing with something deeper, and it's going to keep cropping up.
Let me say something while I'm thinking about it, now that you get to that point. I think that there really has to be, everybody, I've written it, you've written it, this helps a conversation on race, but I think the deeper conversation has to be among us, this vast black diaspora. You, me. We have to have a conversation about what it means to be African American in 2014. I've been in situations where some black writers have been killing other black writers, and some scholars have been killing other black scholars, and this nonsense has got to stop. We've almost got to have the equivalent of a black intellectual civil war, where we kind of get down, roll up our sleeves, and knock this thing out, because it's just too fast. And it's funny that this incident, once again, what these players have been able to do, they have the convenience of being in a locker room where all these guys have come from all these different backgrounds and economic things, get together in one locker room. They leave the ego at the door and say, our goal is winning. We're going to knock this out. They did it in this incident. They said, you know what? We're going to boycott. We used to be in that locker room as a black community. We used to be in that one locker room, but thanks to the invention of integration, we're so far flung that it's been I don't know if we've ever had that conversation.
But I think
But
I think you guys make a really important point about the power of the players here and the power of their collective action, which is why I'm so interested not just in where the broader conversation takes us, but what exactly is going to happen with Donald Sterling and his kind of attempt, which I think is just kind of a pathetic, sad attempt to hold on to his team, because it strikes me that not only the NBA owners, but also the NBA players, and also, honestly, the fans have a lot lot of what happens here. It doesn't strike me that it's sustainable for him to hold on to the team for so long.
But here's the point, too. I want to hold those players accountable, but let's be real. They're discouraged from speaking up. They're discouraged from being with radical black intellectuals or scholars or civil rights leaders because you want to protect your brand. Now, brand management has precluded the very kind of solidarity about what you speak. And look at Riley Cooper that Ta-Nehisi mentioned. Riley Cooper was rewarded with a 4-year, multi-million-dollar contract, while Deshaun Jackson, a much more talented receiver, was sent packing, thank you, to the Washington, D.C. team. Thank you for that. But the reality is, because of alleged ties to gangs. So the racialization of even the perception of reputation goes on at a certain level. That's not just what I can control as a player.
I love their
That's
turning their
institution.
shirts inside out, because it was so eloquent.
It was so eloquent, and
you
it was
know,
also a risk for them.
Michele.
I mean, you made it was a beautiful metaphor you just used about going in the locker room and having one goal, the game of winning, or the idea of winning. I mean, in the game of life, it might be a good idea if we sort of use that same metaphor, because in the sense that maybe.
What does winning mean to us?
But the larger society needs to be a part of this, because if you take it outside of basketball and you're talking about access to housing, access to education, access to meaningful employment, you cannot have an America where all of that only accrues to a certain population, which very soon will be the minority.
And so you make two great points. Number one, we can't take the players off the hook, because the reason why, trust me, the reason why Adam Silver made that statement so quick, because you had Jordan being angry, you had LeBron, you had the President of the United States, you had players saying that not only are we going to boycott this game.
CarMax and Kia and
Sponsors,
Sprint pulling out.
So it's less a moral imperative that, you know what, this house is burning down, I got to call the fire department.
Right.
But now, what happens now, the players have to, and the consumers, by the way, the consumers, they both have to say, wait a minute, if you're going to continue to hang on to this team, we're going to put so much pressure, not just on you, but on the entire league. And I think the problem is right now, everybody wants to just watch the playoffs. The players just want to play, leave us alone, we kind of turn the shirts inside out. It's not enough. And what we're saying is that, no, that's not enough.
But you know what, there's a structure in place that allows that permits that encourages that. They don't want players to become radicalized. They don't want players to become politicized, because it won't stop there. It won't stop with turning a shirt inside out. Then you begin to ask the questions, who's getting the benefit here? You see this sometimes in the union negotiations with the collective bargaining agreement. But more broadly, can we ask players to not simply be narcissistic? The real challenge is when it's about Trayvon, when it's about another issue. Can you do this same kind of response when it's not about athletics? Then we ask you to be Hank Aaron. Then we ask you to be Jim Brown. Then we ask you to be Muhammad Ali.
But I think, Michael, also what they don't want something that's bad for business.
But
This is
the bottom
bad
line,
for
the bottom line,
business.
there's no question.
It's bad for the whole deal. And I think in the end, things don't always happen for the right reasons, as we all know, but they do happen.
But there wouldn't be a bottom line.
Is a
Market
powerful,
power
important
is a
force.
But there wouldn't be a bottom line
And-
without the sacrifices of certain athletes who
Absolutely.
came before, who made it possible for it to be lucrative. Ali gave up so much money so that now athletes could make the money. It would be a shame now that you've made the money, you don't have the conscience that the man who inspired the lucrative accumulation to occur.
Michael, but you're talking in a way that actually seems to believe or argue, and I'm probably misunderstanding you, that players should be kind of monolithic in their
Not at all.
approaches and
They
attitudes
should be
towards
conscientious.
things.
They should. No, I'm saying this. I'm saying they're made monolithic when they talk about the black player. When a dress code is imposed by the NBA, they're made monolithic. I'm saying the society that shoots young people who are black, who dress a certain way, makes them monolithic. I'm saying that what we're trying to do is to shatter the monolith of racial stereotype and suggest that these are conscientious, intelligent, highly articulate young people who come from a situation and a generation that sacrificed for them. I'm asking them to be responsible, not monolithic.
Most of the kids, and the problem is that's why I wrote a book called $40 Million Slaves.
Right.
And part of the reason I did that is that so many young people, athletes, are so not unhistoric.
Right.
that they have no idea of everything you talked about.
Right.
They said Jim Brown, who? I mean, how? and if you have no idea of the battle of the wars that
And
were
they've
fought,
been discouraged
you
from
have
knowing
nothing.
that.
Well,
But
and like I had an interesting conversation.
Let me tell you something. It's a very good point, but I want to tell you something. I don't think this is just among black people. I had somebody ask me the other day who Walter Cronkite was. You know, memories are short.
Well,
in
you know,
the
on
modern
that
world.
memories are short.
Who was
We're
the
getting
first-
older.
And we're all getting older.
You know, there is an opportunity here for the NBA to actually educate people on the NBA
Exactly.
itself.
Right.
Because
Right.
the NBA itself, I mean, a lot of people, we all know the name of the man who integrated baseball.
Right.
I would bet that a lot of people listening to this program right now do not know the name of the man who integrated the NBA.
Brother Lloyd.
The first man, and he wasn't the first to be drafted. He wasn't actually the first to sign, but because of the schedule, he was the first.
kid
to
We
actually
have
had
to.
me.
I'm sorry. We absolutely. The clock. The time has run out. The game is over. To be continued. Thank you all very much.
Bob is technical.
Overtime again?
No overtime.
See?
We'll be back.